Shall we open with prayer? Amen. So I wanted this to be like a Sabbath school, so I'm hoping that we can all participate and share our thoughts. On Thursday we had our prayer meeting, and I found it a blessing. I'm not sure if those who came enjoyed it too. We can speak louder, yeah. Sister Marilyn said she enjoyed it. So I thought it was. So what I wanted to do was just recap what we looked at, and maybe extend our thoughts a little bit more. So the Sabbath school will be centered around Matthew chapter 13. Centered around Matthew chapter. You don't have to turn there at the moment. We're not going to go there right now. But it's Matthew chapter 13, and Matthew chapter 13 is really the chapter that's about parables. So you already know that the class is going to be about parables and how Jesus employs them, how they're used. We didn't actually get a chance really to look at the parable that I wanted to, which was Matthew chapter 13, verses 24 to 30, which is the parable of the wheat and tares. So we're all familiar with that parable. In fact, probably we're familiar with most of the parables in that chapter. In our prayer meeting, we looked at a passage from The Desire of Ages, page 333, paragraph 1. That's what we read. And in fact, we ended up spending most of our time in that chapter, that paragraph. So we're going to review that. But before we do, I just want to take a small passage from the book Christ Object Lessons. This is Christ Object Lessons. It's chapter 8, and it's page 104. So it's Christ Object Lessons, page 104. And this is chapter 8, and the parable is the parable of hidden treasure. I'm sure we're all familiar with this. So if we go to page 104. So there's a person who is doing some work, and in a field he discovers hidden treasure, and he ends up trying to get hold of that treasure. So we're not going to read the parable itself. I just want to go there as an introductory thought. So we'll read it from the Bible. This would be page 103 if we were going to read it from Christ Object Lessons, and we'll go to the Bible verse in a moment. So this is taken from Matthew chapter 13, verse 44. So you can either read it from your Bibles, Matthew 13, verse 44, or you can read it from Christ Object Lessons, page 103. Either way, it's the same one. So the parable itself begins in verse 43. Matthew 13, verse 43, that's where the parable is. So we're going to read verse 44. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto treasure hid in a field, the which, when a man hath found, he hideth, and for joy thereof goeth and selleth all that he hath, and buyeth that field. So I think we're all familiar with this parable. Before we read from Christ Object Lessons, just want to ask the question: if he found his hidden treasure in the field, he's ploughing the field, or he finds hidden treasure, why does he go about selling all that he has and he wants to go and buy the field? Why does he not just take the treasure and run, or wherever he's going to put the treasure?
Yeah, might be hoping
there might be more treasure.
There might be more treasure?
He might be hoping that's exactly what she said.
Yeah. Anyone else have a thought? You know, if you were walking somewhere and you found this treasure, wouldn't you just grab hold of it and go and stash it somewhere instead of going through all this?
Not if you're in a
paraphernalia?
gold mine.
Sorry?
Not if you're in a gold mine or
Yeah.
a diamond mine. Could be a stream of
Yes.
all that.
But you can't see that. You can't see the vein. Even if you picked up a piece of gold, you might find a nugget.
You've got to take the pickaxe and
Yeah.
potential.
So there's a potential. There's a thought that there's probably going to be more treasure here, which is why he goes through all of this effort. So I didn't want to focus on that thought, but just I think that's an interesting thought, that he expects to find more. So having once been fed, if you like, he expects to receive more. So she explains in the second paragraph, this is page 103, paragraph 2, what actually the context of this is. You know, they don't have banks, and the only place that is really secure that you would hide your treasure or save it would be to put it, you know, to bury it in the ground. And then what ends up happening, then if you've ever done this, you've put something away, you've hidden it away in a safe storage, you don't look at it for ages, and you actually begin to forget where you've put things.
You lose it.
Yeah, I've done that quite often. You know, you lose things on your computer, you file it away, you know where it is, or you know, I've put things away, tools or even valuable things, and after about a year or so, you think, where did I put that thing? And I've lost it. So this is what happens in this story, that the person who ever buried this treasure has actually lost visibility of it. They may have passed away, they may have died, not passed the information on, and this person just trips across this gold mine. So in paragraph 3 it says, a man hires land to cultivate, and as the oxen plough the soil, buried treasure is unearthed. As the man discovers this treasure, he sees that a fortune is within his reach. Restoring the gold to its hiding place, he returns to his home and sells all that he has in order to purchase the field containing the treasure. His family and his neighbours think that he is acting like a madman. Looking on the field, they see no value in the neglected soil, but the man knows what he is doing. And when he has a title to the field, he searches every part of it to find the treasure that he has secured. So even though she doesn't quite say it, but she does allude to the fact that he's going to search the whole field to see if there's anything else hidden there. I want to go to page 104. This is just an introductory thought. It's about the discussion that we had at our prayer meeting. So we're kind of doing it backwards. So for those of us who were at prayer meeting, hopefully we'll see why we want to read this. And if we weren't, it starts to bring the subject into focus. Page 104. The subtitle is How Hidden? How is treasure hidden? The treasures of the gospel are said to be hidden by those who are wise in their own estimation, who are puffed up by the teaching of vain philosophy. The beauty and power and mystery of the plan of redemption are not perceived. Many have eyes, but they see not. They have ears, but they hear not. They have intellect, but they discern not the hidden treasure. So that paragraph, what is that teaching us? What are you picking up from that paragraph, page 104, paragraph 3? We don't. So, first sentence, the treasures of the gospel are said to be hidden. Where are they hidden? Where are these treasures of the gospel actually hidden?
In plain sight, in the Bible.
In the Bible, yes. So all I wanted us to pick up is they're in the Bible. So people are reading the Bible and they've got a problem because they can't actually see these treasures. They're hidden somewhere. And if you could just repeat what you said, my sister?
Oh, they haven't got the spiritual discernment to be able to see.
Yes. So everyone's reading the same words. We're all reading exactly the same words. We can all read obviously in our language. We can all read English. We can all understand what those words actually mean. But just because we can read the words and understand the English grammar, etc., the story, of what it's about, it doesn't mean that we actually understand the treasures of the gospel, because they're hidden somewhere in these words. And as you just said a moment ago, they're hidden in
Plain sight.
They're hidden in plain sight. And why are they hidden from us? You said we don't have the spiritual discernment. Any other thoughts? Why are they hidden to us?
Preconceived opinions.
We have preconceived opinions of what we think is right and wrong, and therefore all we can see is just a reflection essentially of ourselves.
We're blind and we're deaf.
We're blind and we're deaf. And she says this, having eyes they do not see, having ears they do not hear. So she's already beginning to define that famous, Jesus says it a few times actually, but that famous passage when he says, having eyes you don't see, having ears you don't hear, what that begins to mean. So she's going to repeat this thought 3 times. The first one, we're in the last sentence of this paragraph, we'll come back to it in a moment. Many have eyes but they see not, they have ears but they hear not. And she's going to explain what this means. So if she's going to explain what this means, what she's going to do is give this statement, which she takes straight out of the Bible, and she's going to tell you these statements mean this thing. So the first thing we want to see is that if you have eyes, you actually get to a place where your eyes are shut that you can't see. So you have eyes and you can't see. So you have ears, but you're like that monkey who covers its ears. Yeah? So the person is going to block their ears off. Having ears, they cannot hear. So if we're familiar with this technique of repeat and enlarge, I want to say that this is a repeat and enlarge. So having eyes that don't see and having ears that don't hear, that means the same thing. So at this level, an eye and an ear mean the same thing. And what does she say this means? How does she define what that means? She says eyes and ears, eyes semicolon, ears semicolon, and then what? Sister Brody?
They have intellect, but they don't discern the hidden treasure.
Okay, so an eye and an ear equals what?
Intellect.
Intellect. Is it I? Is that I or E? Is that right? Intelligent? They have intelligence. Yeah? So an eye and an ear is a symbol of intelligence. Yeah? So this person's intelligent, but what are they not able to do? So if you don't have eyesight and you can't hear properly, what is that? What does that mean? So I should probably do it this way. You've got eyes and ears, and now you have shut your eyes and you're not listening, you're blocking your ears. What's that equal?
Well, really stupidity. I mean,
Stupidity?
yeah. Because, I mean, God gave us, He wants us to search and to keep searching because, like the field, you've got to keep digging, don't you? With the Bible, you must keep digging and learn as much as we possibly can and go back and forth.
Yes.
Through it.
So how does Ellen White describe what it means not to have eyes and not to have ears? Spiritual blindness. Do you have it in front of you? What word she uses?
Discernment.
Can you see it there? It says they have intelligence or intellect, but what don't they have? Can you see it there? It's page. So they have intellect because they've got eyes and ears, but what don't they have?
Discernment.
They don't have discernment. Can you see that? Yeah? So to have eyes and ears means you have intelligence, but you're not able to use your eyes and you're not able to hear anything with your ears, which means you don't have discernment. So using this repeat and enlarge technique, she's going to tell you what these Bible statements mean. If we're familiar, let me step back. If we're happy to say the Bible and the Spirit of Prophecy are the inspired Word of God, just to keep them at that level, so that there's no distinction between them. It's just inspiration. Bible and Spirit Prophecies are inspired words, inspired of God. What rule of William Miller is being used here? What rule would we say this is? There's 14 rules. Who wants to have a go?
Speaking of spirit of prophecy, would that be like a repeat and enlarge?
Yes, so she's using the repeat and enlarge technique. That's exactly what she's doing. She's saying an eye is an ear, so she's repeating, but she's enlarging upon it because an ear doesn't look like an eye. And then she's going to define what those things mean. So she's going to say this means this. So I could say, instead of equals, I could say and.
Rule number 5, that'll be natural and spiritual.
Natural and spiritual. So if we go to rule number 5, what does rule number 5 say of William Miller? Does anybody have a copy here? Do you want to paraphrase, Sister Brody?
Scripture explains itself.
Yep. So do you have it there, Brother Darren? Yep. Could you read out rule number 5 to us?
No, I haven't.
Scripture must be its own expositor, since it is a rule of itself. If I depend on a teacher to expound it to me, and he should guess at its meaning, or desire to have it so on account of his sectarian creed, or to be thought wise, then his guessing, desire, creed, or wisdom is my rule, not the Bible.
Okay, so there are a number of words there. Brother John, what does it mean if you've got what does the word sectarian mean? Comes from the word sect.
Like a particular order or something.
Yeah. So what word would we normally use? We don't like the word sect. There's a bad connotation. What word do we use though, which kind of sounds nice? Denomination, if I could say that. So a certain denomination, Baptists, Seventh-day Adventists, Methodists have a certain perspective, a certain explanation or understanding of Scripture, and it's peculiar or unique to their church's understanding of what God is trying to teach. So that's what a sectarian view is. Then the word creed, it's mentioned about creed. What's creed? Belief. So it's a person's understanding of what God is saying. So, if we said the Father, Son and the Holy Spirit, it's a biblical statement, then what we would do is explain what that meant. and our explanation would normally be understood to be the creed, or our explanation of what the Bible is talking about. So rule number 5 is interesting, because if you go to rule number 14, which is the last rule, rule 5 and rule 14 are very similar, especially the last bit, which says basically don't listen to human interpretation of what inspiration means. In rule 14, it's called bigotry. You become a bigot. And in rule 5, the principle's there, but it words it in a slightly different way. It's a shorter rule. Rule 14 is quite long. So rule 5 and rule 14 have a similar property or characteristic. It basically says, trust the word of God, don't trust a human being's interpretation of that word. Is that a fair representation? Yeah. Expositor. It says, let the Bible be its own expositor. What does the word expositor mean? Expose. So it comes from the word expose.
Own teacher.
Own teacher. So let the Bible expose itself. So if we can change that word expositor to expose, what other word could we use?
Reveal.
Reveal. Could we say explain? Yeah. So let the Bible, or let inspiration explain itself. He's going to say Bible exclusively because that's the book that he's working with. And so because we use the Bible and Spirit of Prophecy, I would just want to say, let inspiration explain itself. And how did you paraphrase it right at the beginning? Sister Brody?
The Bible, did I say the Bible explains itself?
Yep. So let the Bible, or let inspiration explain itself. So we've come full circle, and I think that's a really easy and useful definition to have about what rule number 5 is actually saying. So I want to suggest that what she's doing here is rule number 5. There's a statement. It says you've got an eye and an ear. These are symbols. And if I asked you, what does an eye and an ear mean? What is it a symbol of? We could all have our own different answers. And how would you know if that answer was correct or not? Depends on what creed or what sectarian view you have. But what we want to know is what inspiration defines those things to be, instead of what we think. So she's quite clear that an eye and an ear actually means intelligence, or intellect, as she would say. So if an eye and an ear means intelligence, what does it mean if you're not looking and you're not hearing? It means that you don't have discernment. So she's giving you a clear definition of what these symbols mean. We don't have to guess at it. She gives it straight to us. And I think it's important to see that all the hard work has been done for us. And this is, as I said, rule number 5.
So if you've got your eyes open and your ears, you're alert. But if you can't see and you can't hear, you're likely to stumble.
Yep, you definitely will stumble. So the problem is that, do you have the realization that you're stumbling? Do you think that you're stumbled? Because in real life, if I'm walking, if I stumbled, you'd see it and I'd feel it. Yeah, I'd know I had fallen. But in this situation, would you actually know that you're fallen? You don't know you're fallen because you're intelligent. You have intelligence, but you don't discern actually what the truth really is. And she says that, if you go to the middle part, it says, those who are wise in their own estimation, who are puffed up by the teaching of vain philosophy, the beauty and power and mystery of the plan of redemption are not perceived. So you don't even know that you're fallen or you've stumbled. Did you want to say something, Brendan? I didn't let you finish your point before. Yeah? So, next paragraph. I like this, the way she explains this. A man might pass over the place where treasure has been concealed. In dire necessity, he might sit down to rest at the foot of a tree, not knowing of the riches hidden at its roots. So it was with the Jews. If it was with the Jews, who else is it with? With us, Brother John?
But you said Seventh-day Adventist.
Yes, 7 day. It's the same with us. If the Jews experienced that, we experience the same thing. So we know that, you know, we go to the beach or we go to a forest, we go for a walk, and we just sit down and rest, and just below our feet, someone has hidden some treasure there, and because we don't have the wherewithal to think about our environment, we're just so focused on ourselves, we're puffed up with all our vain philosophy, our vain teachings, we don't perceive what's just beneath our feet. It's hidden to us. So I like that thought.
What's treasure for one person, though, is maybe trash to another.
Yes,
And that's what the sermon's all about.
yes. As a golden treasure, truth has been entrusted to the Hebrew people. The Jewish economy, bearing the signature of heaven, had been instituted by Christ himself. In types and symbols, the great truths of redemption were veiled. Yet when Christ came, the Jews did not recognize him to whom all these symbols pointed. They had the word of God in their hands, but the traditions which had been handed down from generation to generation and the human interpretation of the scriptures hid from them the truth as it is in Jesus. The spiritual import of the sacred writings was lost. The treasure house of all knowledge was open to them, but they knew it not. Now the reason I came to this passage is in the second from the last sentence of paragraph 4, at the end of it, it says, the truth as it is in Jesus. I don't know if we can see that. Yeah, the truth as it is in Jesus. It's the last part of the sentence, which is the sentence just before the last one, the second from the last sentence. The truth as it is in Jesus. So I really like that statement. I don't know if you've ever thought about it before. If you actually take that statement as it says, the truth as it is in Jesus, Ellen White uses that 708 times in her writings. It's a phrase that she uses over and over again. This concept of the truth as it is in Jesus. So there are a number of components to that. Obviously there's the truth. And truth, you might think, is enough. You know, if either something is truthful or it's erroneous. Is it that simple? So the answer is no, obviously, because she makes it more complicated, or she alludes that it's more complicated than that, because truth in and of itself isn't enough. How do you know if something is true or not? What faculty of the mind do you need to have to know if something is true? In the context that we've just spoken about, what faculty of the mind would you know if something's truth? Intellect. Yeah? If you're an intelligent person, you know what's right and what's wrong. Yeah? You can work it out. It's not that difficult to do it if you have a measure or a level of intelligence, depending on what the subject is, depending on what the issue is. So when it says the truth as it is in Jesus, what is that thought alluding to?
The intellect that Christ has in him.
Yes, it's a certain form of intellect, certain way of understanding things. So I want to say it's all to do with this imagery here, that you can have intelligence, you can look at something and say, oh, you know, that's truth, but it doesn't mean you have discernment of what that truth really is, the import of that truth. I didn't want to spend much more time in this paragraph, but I wanted us to make the connection. The hidden treasure. So we're in Christ Objections 104. What is the treasure? The treasure is obviously a symbol. What did he say the treasure was? Sorry? Jesus himself?
What's the truth?
Truth?
Holy Scripture.
The Holy Scriptures?
Well, I thought it said the kingdom of heaven itself.
The kingdom of heaven
And
itself?
You have to understand what that means
Oh,
then.
gospel is the truth.
So,
Yeah.
So let's go back and have a quick read, because we have a number of different answers. All of them are correct. A man might pass over the place where treasure has been concealed. In dire necessity, he might sit down to rest at the foot of the tree, not knowing of the riches at its roots. So that's the riches are these treasures. So it was with the Jews. As a golden treasure, truth had been entrusted to the Hebrew people. So the treasure is the truth. Yeah. So we know it's the truth. The Jewish economy, bearing the signature of heaven, had been instituted by Christ himself. In types and symbols, the great truths of redemption were veiled. So, what does the word veil mean when it's veiled? To conceal.
I just said hidden.
Hidden. So we can. I'll read that again. In types and symbols, the great truths of redemption were hidden. So if the great truths were hidden, where were they hidden? In the parable itself, it's hidden in the field. But where are these great truths of redemption hidden? In the types and the symbols. Can we see that? So you've got the types and the symbols. In those symbols, we'll just go with the symbols. That's where the truths are hidden. They're hidden in the symbols. So again, she's clearly telling us that the treasure is the truth. So if you want to understand what the truth is, what do you need to know?
Types and the symbols.
You need to know what the symbols and the types mean. So the types and the symbols point to what? What are the types and symbols pointing to?
Great truths of redemption.
Yes. So it's the truth. And we'll put redemption. I'll put the word redeem. It's the great truths of redemption. Do we know what the word redeem means? Restore? I don't want to use the word restore because you've got the same prefix. Redeem, restore.
Would it be saved from? To be saved from?
To be saved from. So it's two words. I think I heard someone say it. So it's two words. What does re mean? Right?
Do it again.
Do again. Or repeat it. Repeat is not a good definition because you have the word re in it, the prefix re. So do again. And this word deem, it's not a word that we're familiar with because it comes from I think it's a Latin word, but it means to buy or to purchase. So to redeem means to buy something again. Yeah. So the types and the symbols point to the truth of redemption, or the truth of how you buy back something or purchase something. If we're okay with that. These types and symbols, can we have a couple of examples? What would a type and a symbol be? In the context of what we're talking about, or in the context of the Jewish economy, or even the Christian economy, what would a type and a symbol be? Just a lamb. Good. So we've got a lamb. Other one? A lion? Where does God want to live? In the hearts of men, but the symbol? Where was God living? Not heaven. In the sanctuary, good. So all of these are symbols or types, and they're all pointing to one thing, which is the truth. So if we think about this model, all of these are literal entities, real life things that you can touch, you can see, and they're all pointing to a truth. And the truth is something that you can't touch, it's a concept, it's an idea. So right here we can see that you go from the natural to the spiritual. So the hidden treasure is truth, and the truth has been buried in a field. At a superficial level, we could argue that the field would be what? The Word of God, the Bible. But as she explains it, what is the field really in the context of the way she's describing it? Man's mind. She makes it something positive, because when you say man's mind, you're making it sound like, like, you know, you've got a problem. Remember that the owner of the field buried that treasure in that field. That was a good thing to do. It wasn't a bad thing. Yeah, so it wasn't a bad thing to hide the treasure. You should do that, otherwise you're going to lose it. Yeah. So what is the field? So, okay, so let's think about this. You've got the treasure and it's hidden in this field. When she explains this, we're on 104 paragraph 4. Where are these truths hidden? They're hidden in what? In the Jewish economy. Can we see that? In the types and the symbols in the Jewish economy. So I let Sister Brodie put lion in there, but she can see now that whilst lion is a symbol of something, in the context, lion probably wouldn't have been a good example, because a lion is not part of the Jewish economy. The sacrificial service certainly is. The Passover, all of those feasts that they have, everything about their dress code, the way they would eat, all of that symbology, that economy, all is pointing to the truth. But those truths are hidden in the Jewish economy. So all this Jewish economy, was it meant to be something good or bad? It was meant to be something good. So when I say it was meant to be, it was something good. What's the problem with it? What happens when you bury stuff after 12 months? You forget. You forget where you've put it. So the Jewish economy, which was designed to be something good, what did it end up becoming? Obviously something bad. But how does it become bad? Because inbuilt in that economy, God has hidden the truth, and after a while, what do you forget? You forget the significance of what all of this symbology is about. It's like you bury it in the field and you've got no idea where the thing is. So someone sort of stumbles across it. So all this symbology, the Jews lost sight of everything that it meant, and so then it ends up being a waste of time. In fact, worse than a waste of time. It actually has a negative effect upon their experience with God and other human beings. Do they know how to dress properly? How to eat properly? Do they know how to track the cycle of the stars and the sun and the moon? They can keep time. They have a lot of what? Not on the board. They have a lot of intelligence. They have a lot of intelligence. They can work out everything, how to do it all. But what are they not able to do? They're not able to discern what?
What it all means.
What it all means. They're not able to discern what these types and these parables or what the Jewish economy is all about. And that's the problem that we are facing. We have all of these symbols. We have all of this Adventist economy. And are we experts upon it? Of course we are. We know all the dates. We know all the history of the Millerites and of Christ and all the other, we'll still say dispensations. It's not a bad word. We have all this information. We have all this intellect. But what is our problem?
What does it mean?
What does it mean? We have lost the ability to discern what all of this information or all of this symbology means.
But the man who was buying the field, it wasn't his field.
Yes.
So we've got the history, or the generations of history.
Yeah, the more you... I mean, this is just... It's literally one verse, verse 44. Verse 43 is sort of the introductory thought. But verse 44, there's so much here, because then you start saying, this is an interdispensational or intergenerational issue. Someone buries the treasure there, and they hide it, and they've lost track of all of what's there, and someone new comes and actually gets the blessing of that hidden treasure.
You can disturb the treasure. Depends on how deep it is, of course.
Yeah.
But if you disturb the treasure and one little bit comes up, and that's noticeable, you presume then that there's just a lot of other stuff down there too.
Yes.
Does this bring in the agricultural model using ploughing?
Yes. Oh, she definitely says he's ploughing the field. I think we read that.
That brings in a whole new...
Yep.
It tells you that you know where to place it.
Yes.
The context of the paragraph is the treasure's buried at the root of a tree, so it's feeding that tree. So even if he forgets about it, the tree that's coming up is fed by the truth. So other people can see that tree
Yes.
if they have intellect.
So, what I wanted us to see is that we can understand how some of the rules are being employed here. This is rule number 5. It's repeat and enlarge. So, the eye and the ear, there's a repeating concept here. It tells you what it means, so it's going to have the definition of an eye and an ear. So it's not something that we have to guess. I'll say inspiration is its own expositor or its own explainer. We see the relationship between intelligence and discernment. It's not enough to be intelligent. There are many clever people on this planet, but they don't have discernment. They're not able to understand actually the purpose of everything. We can define what the treasure is. It's truth. She says it's actually the truth of redemption. Redemption is 2 words, to and to deem, or to buy back something again, which means it was purchased once, but it's going to be repurchased. We gave some examples. We'll go with the lamb and the sanctuary, because she talks about the Jewish economy. It's a whole system of living, a whole way of life. So that way of life was meant to teach us the truth. But in fact, what does that way of life end up becoming? Ends up becoming a hindrance to actually receiving the truth. Instead of making it easier, it ends up becoming harder.
Forces you to do things that you wouldn't normally do.
So it's harder for whom? It's harder for whom to understand what the truth is. In the real context of, you know, Jesus and he's talking to people, who is it harder to, which group of people is it harder for them, is it harder to understand what the truth is? The Jews. If we're okay with that? Jesus is standing there, and Jesus is whom? What's his job function? It's all on the board here. What is he? He's the
Redeemer.
There he is right here. He's the Redeemer. So if he's the Redeemer, then therefore he is the truth, because it's the truth of redemption. So him being right in front of them is going to do what? Teach them how to be redeemed or how to be saved. It's through him. He's going to go to the Jews, and what are the Jews going to do? They're going to reject him. They're not going to accept him. Why? What's going to stop them accepting Jesus? Their own preconceived ideas.
Their economy that they're not understanding correctly.
The Jewish economy is going to stop them from actually understanding who Christ is. And what was the Jewish economy meant to do? It was meant to reveal the Redeemer. It was meant to reveal the Redeemer throughout all of that history. How would it have revealed the Redeemer? Through the Lamb and through the sanctuary, through typology, through the symbols. Through the symbols you could discern the truth about the Redeemer. Perhaps the simplest example is Abraham is going to do what? He's going to, who said? He's going to sacrifice his son. It's one of the clearest examples of what God wanted his people to understand. We could call that the Jewish economy, if you like. That story, which was a story about the economy of how you're supposed to operate and function in this world, clearly shows you what the father was going to do to his son, and the price that the son would pay, and what that would mean. So there's many things we could discuss about that story, about Abraham and his son. So we know that the Jewish economy, its purpose was to teach them how to be redeemed. It was teaching them the truth of that mechanism. But what does it end up becoming? It ends up becoming the biggest obstacle or the biggest hindrance in their ability to understand how redemption works. Or in the way we would explain it, who Jesus is. He's standing there in front of me. He says, I am the way, the truth and the life. No man can come unto the Father except through me, by me. You have to go through Jesus to do that. And what are they stubbornly going to do? They're going to refuse, they're going to resist going to the Father through Jesus, through the truth. How are they going to get to the Father? Through, because they're going to get to the Father in their thinking, through their intelligence. How are they going to get through to the Father? Which is the Jewish economy. Who gave them the Jewish economy? We'll go with the Father, we'll go with God. From their understanding, if the Father's given them the Jewish economy, it was really Christ, as you say. And because he gave it to them, they know it's the truth. They know it's the way to salvation. So they're going to press forward with this, going along this path to be one with God through the economy, through intelligence. But all of that economy was designed for one sole purpose. It wasn't the end, it was the means to the end. Yeah? What is the end? Here, the truth of redemption. This would be the end. What's the means? This is the means. The means to the end. It's the parable. You go from the natural to the spiritual. The natural will teach you the spiritual. And what were the Jews fixated about? The natural. They're locked into the natural, and they say we can get to God through the natural. Ellen White doesn't say through the natural, she says through the Jewish economy. So if the Jews are locked down in this Jewish economy, in this natural realm, that they have no access now to God, they can't find access to Him because they've lost the purpose of it. The truth was where? Where was the truth? It was right in front of them, and it was hidden in these types and symbols. It was hidden in the economy itself, and it's so well hidden that they can't see it. Now, I say so well hidden. We can look at a subject from two perspectives. We can look at it from a positive and a negative perspective. So Sister Marilyn a few moments ago gave a negative perspective. How was that truth hidden? What caused it to be hidden? Because God didn't cause it to be hidden. How did it get hidden?
Man's thinking.
Man's thinking. We'll use two words. Through customs and traditions. Who gave them the traditions? God gave them the traditions. So, you can either blame God or you can blame man, depending on the point that you want to make. Both, I don't want to say both are at fault because I'll get told off with it if I say God's at fault, but there's issues on both sides. But so when we think about from man's perspective, from a human's perspective, the reason it all gets problematic is because they get fixated about the types and the symbols. The Jewish economy becomes the end. It doesn't become the means to an end. So let's take God's responsibility. Why did God ever do it this way?
The spiritual is unknown and He had to use something that was known. So He gave us the natural, which was the earthly sanctuary.
Okay, so if everybody hold on to that thought that Brother Graham gave, hold on to that thought, put yourself in God's place. What would you do if you were Him? What would you do?
Probably do what they did. But are we God? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you're God. You put your place in God's. What are you going to do? You need to teach them about the truth of redemption. How would you go about doing it?
Do exactly what I did.
Why?
Why would you?
Yeah, why not do it another way?
Just a thought, with the sanctuary, it's a very visual thing, as well as an application of doing continually. This was something they did time and time again. From the outset, they knew every material that was in that sanctuary and all of the furniture. They understood what it was, how to apply them, and it was a repeat.
Yes. Anyone else?
The natural's visual. The natural's something we're living with on a daily basis. So it was things that they knew.
But it just
Through the
became
natural.
habitual, didn't it? It was just they didn't.
Is that what you're trying to ask?
Yeah.
Okay.
It seems like if I were God, I would have just told them straight out what He was going to do, how it was going to look.
You'd think that, wouldn't you? You'd think,
Tell it as it
Yeah,
is.
but telling people to do something is not them learning or understanding the situation. Just by telling somebody to do something.
So
That's why you have rules and methods and all that sort of theory.
what is God trying to do by going down this path? What's He trying to help us understand? Why is He doing this? Why has He done it that way? He created the earth, and Adam and Eve went through nature. Some spiritual. I don't know.
Brother Graham, can you repeat what you said?
So the thing that is unknown is the truth of redemption, and you have to use the spiritual. And you have to. He's used something that is known, so He's revealed the sanctuary how it functions, as a way of understanding what was unknown.
So I want to ask a question. We'll go back thousands of years, maybe 6,000 years, maybe a little bit more, and we're in heaven, and are all those angels good? Yeah, they're all good. Are they all spiritual? Yes? So I want to read a Spirit of Prophecy statement. We don't have to find it. It's one that you're familiar with. In fact, you'll be able to finish it. Spiritual things are... Okay, so we all know that phrase. Spiritual things are spiritually discerned. So I'm going to ask the question again. Go back 6,000 years. The angels, are they spiritual beings? You all said yes. So what do angels need to do? Spiritual things are spiritually discerned. What does discern mean? It's right here. We picked it up. Understood. Okay, so you've got intelligence. How do you understand things? Through intelligence. But discernment is also understanding. So we've got understanding and understanding in slightly different ways. I want us to see that at one level, intelligence and discernment have similar properties to them, but you can be intelligent and not discern. So you can understand and not... Discernment, you said, was? So you can understand and not understand. So you can understand some things but not fully understand. So let me just finish my point, because I'll forget it, not because of any other reason. 6,000 years, the angels are all spiritual beings. What do they need to do? They need to discern or understand. What do they need to understand? You alluded to it.
The truth.
The truth. Who is the truth?
Jesus.
We'll just go with God. So they need to understand God better. Yeah?
I would say so, because they didn't understand sin.
And understanding God is this big and angels are this big, and it takes a lot of time and effort to understand God. You know, it's a learning curve. So they have to go through a long time period and also a lot of exercises or education to understand God. So they need to be able to have a discernment. Discernment is understanding of God. So they need to understand who God is. So if you were a spiritual being... let me stop that. Sorry, make your point, my sister, I forgot. Yeah.
Just as with the angels, it is with us on this level, that with the eyes and the ears that you use, they're mediums to receive information, which is essentially what intelligence is. It's information, but you can receive information but not know what it is that you're hearing or looking at. So there's that discernment again.
I want to take that one thought where you said they're a medium. Yeah? A medium means a vehicle or a mechanism. So if we agree that angels are spiritual, and what do they need to do? They need to understand who God is. We know that God is spiritual. God is spirit. So if they were spiritual, how would they understand or learn about God?
The natural.
I'm going to read the passage. I'm going to read it. But spiritual things spiritually discern. So I'm going to rephrase that in my own way. Spiritual beings understand things spiritually. If you're okay with that? Spiritual beings understand things spiritually. So if these are spiritual beings, how would they understand God? Spiritually.
But they wouldn't have a natural.
They wouldn't have
a natural?
So they wouldn't need one.
No,
They wouldn't need a natural because they're spiritual beings.
but they sin.
Okay, so before we go into the sin bit,
By jumping ahead.
if they're spiritual beings, how would God teach them? Spiritual things are spiritually understood. So he would teach them through spirituality or a spiritual mechanism. Did he do that? Did he do that? So the angels themselves, they're created. Is there a hierarchy?
Yes.
A natural, if I can call it a physical hierarchy? Yeah? So he's going to teach them something about God through what? Through a natural or a physical hierarchy. Then we can go straight, we can just 2 feet jump straight into the story of the creation of humanity or human beings. Okay, won't even do that. So they're in the midst of all of this conflict, and Jesus is over there, and the Father is over here, and there's a spare seat. And what's he going to say? Come on up. To Jesus. Was that physical? Yeah? He's going to say, come and physically stand here, and then what's he going to tell everyone to do? Physically or spiritually? Physically. So what is all the purpose of all of that? Moving location. Jesus is going to move location. They have to do something. What's the purpose of all that physical act? To explain something that's... They're going to explain the spiritual using the natural. So I want to argue that even though we would think that angels are all spiritual, and I don't know what we actually mean by that, if we actually mean that they're not body but they're sort of like energy fields or clouds or whatever, or that they're so perfect that they're so spiritual that they're not carnal, because that's often how we think about spiritual and non-spiritual. We think about spiritual is good, carnal is bad. Yes. So what I want to suggest is they're spiritual beings. God is spirit. Human beings are spirit. We're all spiritual beings. If we said that we live in our bodies, we can receive new bodies. There's this interaction between the natural or the physical and the spiritual. That even though they're spiritual beings, the only way they can learn about God is through the natural. Through actually going through tests or an exercise. I want to call it through an economy. We won't call it the Jewish economy. We'll call it the angelic economy. So God's going to set up an angelic economy. For what purpose?
To teach them about Himself.
To teach them about the truth. And they have all this economy up there, which was meant to teach them something. And what happens? The truth all gets buried and hidden, and they actually lose or forget the purpose of all of that structure that God has created for their benefit, to learn about Him, and He ends up doing what? Helping them or hindering them? It actually ends up destroying them. There's war in heaven. The whole economy that was designed for good ends up becoming bad. So when we talk about spiritual things are spiritually discerned, often we think about good and bad. And I want to say, the angels are all good and they're all spiritual beings, but even they, because they're created beings, have their limitation in how they can understand God. And the limitation is the same ones we have. Or what I could say is, God is limited. God has limitations. What's His limitation? What's His purpose? His purpose is to teach people the truth about Himself, but He's limited. Okay?
Well, it is true, because He can't save without blood. So there's certain constraints He has.
Yes. So He's got certain constraints, and one of the constraints is, what does He want to do with the angels? He wants them to come up higher, come up closer to Him. And how can He teach them that? He has to teach them through the natural. It's the only way He can do it. So this problem that God is facing is not only a human problem, I want to suggest. When we came back and said, well, you know, if all this is going to cause a mess, how would you do it if you were him? So Sister Brody said, well, you know, just tell him straight. You know, he says, this is how it is. And he can't, because if he said this is how it is, people would say, I don't understand, explain what you mean. And how do we say, you know, if I explain some complex concept, what would you want me to do? You either show me, you say
Simplify.
You say simplify, or what you often ask is, show me an example. Say, give me an example of this. And what is an example?
A natural.
A natural, a type, or a shadow. That's to be an example of what it is.
It took God 4,000 years, didn't it, to actually reveal Satan, the motivation behind Satan at the cross.
Yes.
I mean, he tells us in his word he was a murderer from the beginning, but God had to allow him to reveal that.
Through the natural manifestations of his kingdoms.
Yeah.
Yes. And the Jewish economy was designed to help them, and if we could say it this way, the Jewish economy gets hijacked by Satan, and it's going to be used, we could say, either against the Jews or against God. Either way, it's going to now be used against him. Just like it was in heaven. The whole economy, the angelic economy. What does Lucifer look like? What's his title?
Boss angel.
Boss angel. Lucifer means light bearer. So in that economy that he creates, it was designed to teach them about God. It gets hijacked because Lucifer says, I'm so good, I'm equal with God. I'm equal, you know, he's going to say equal with Jesus because he's going to have this fight, but he's saying I'm equal with God. So the whole economy is going to get twisted around and used for the wrong purpose. And what I want to suggest out of all of that is that God does not have a choice. Because he is so separate from us, from everything that he's created, he's so spiritual, and anything that he creates, he's so not spiritual or unspiritual. Even though it's created in his image, the only way he can get all of his created beings to grow or to get closer to him has to be through this methodology, through typology or symbology. That's why Lucifer is created this way. He's created so beautiful and attractive because what's he meant to be? A reflection of God. He's as close as you can get to God in anything that God had ever made up to that moment. Until he makes us. So he's going to go from an angelic economy to a human economy. And the purpose of that human economy was to teach whom? It was to teach the angels how to get closer to God, to understand the truth about what God was really like.
So are the angels sort of like robots to a certain degree?
In what way?
Well, they were told to do things and they did them because they said they loved God. So,
Yes.
and God didn't reveal himself in any other way. But then they didn't have that experience of counteracting, which Satan did.
I want to suggest that God doesn't have a choice but to do things in this way, to explain himself through the natural. If we can see that, then we can see why there was such a problem at the first Advent. God's tied his hands, not just when he created human beings. This problem goes way back before that. Even though the angels are spiritual beings, they can only understand God through types and symbols. We could say that Lucifer, who is called the light bearer, would be a symbol of, we could just say with God, symbol of God. God is the light bearer, the ultimate light bearer. So he, in his actual being, he becomes a symbol. Just like Adam was a symbol of God. And all these symbols are there to teach us about who God is, but they get wrecked, they get abused, and they become the biggest hindrance. So in a time of Christ, when all of this Jewish economy now is going to actually stop God's people from learning about Him, who are the people that could learn about God? It's the Jews can't. The Gentiles, because what do the Gentiles not have?
Jewish economy.
They don't have an economy. They're sort of like they've got this clean sheet of paper, and they can actually look at things in a more, maybe if I could say, more objective way, without all the hindrances that this economy has left them. And that economy has wrecked or ruined the Jews because of customs and traditions. They've lost focus of all of that. So you've got, that's why over and over again in the Gospels you see that Gentiles don't have all the baggage, don't have all the issues. You know, the few examples that we have, the Samaritan woman, the Syrophoenician, the centurion, these people don't have that baggage. The Good Samaritan, yes. So I like that thought about what the truth really is and why the truth is so hard for us as Adventists to accept. And if you see the disciples, why they have so much problems. Why did the disciples have so many problems? Because they're Jews. They have all of this baggage to basically get rid of. And they manage, which should really give us hope. By the time you get to Pentecost, now they really have shaken off, perhaps not 100%, but enough of the Jewish economy to actually understand what the truth is, what the spiritual is. Yes. And that's why we, as Adventists, we in this movement have struggled so much. Why it's been so hard for us to get our lives in order, to do our work properly. And even though we think that we've grown a lot, and we have, you know, in many things, our training isn't quite finished yet. So if you've watched presentations that have been put out recently, we're now showing clearly that the cross, the waymark of the cross in the line of Christ, is where in our history? Right now. As we approach, we have a few weeks to go. November the 9th, Raphia, the close of probation, depending on what symbol you give to that waymark, is the cross. That's Raphia. The next waymark is Panium. So if this is the cross, what would the next major waymark be in the history of the disciples? Pentecost, good. I'm going to put 50 here. It's not exactly 50 days from the cross itself. It's 50 days from the first day of unleavened bread, the Sunday resurrection day. So you've got the cross and you've got Pentecost. And at Pentecost, we know that 3,000 people are baptized, all Jews. Yes. So we can see this pattern being fulfilled before our eyes. And this is where the disciples really begin to do their work. There's 50 days. We can split that into two parts, 40 and 10. They have 10 days in the upper room. There's 120 of them. So we know that our training isn't fully complete. Even though we have some level of understanding at the cross, we know that the disciples are scattered. There's a denial of the truth here Peter's going to deny the truth. You have the story of John, who's faithful with Christ's mother and the other women who are his disciples. There's all that story that's happening in this history, but in this 40 days, Christ is going to teach them the truth in a way that really solidifies them. They come together having accepted the truth for 10 days, and they're bound as one group of people before they begin to do this work. So even though we think that the movement's doing well, we've accepted a number of truths, we know that we really haven't got to completely, fully understanding who Christ is and what the truth is, because it really happens in this history here that we have this full understanding of Christ. In our prayer meeting, we looked at Desire of Ages, page 331. So I just want to read that paragraph. It had been an eventful day in the life of Jesus. Besides the Sea of Galilee, he had spoken his first parables, by familiar illustrations, again explaining to the people the nature of his kingdom and the manner in which it was to be established. So when we read from Christ Object Lessons 104 and we did all of this, we saw that the types and the symbols, the Jewish economy, pointed to the truth of redemption. The truth of redemption was the treasure that was hidden. Now she's going to explain the same dynamic, but it's going to use different imagery. Now it says, by familiar illustrations, again explaining to the people the nature of his kingdom and the manner in which it was to be established. So what's the truth now? It's not the truth of redemption. Now that we know how this relationship works, I'm sort of working backwards. What we want to do is we want to fill in this blank, and then we want to fill in this blank. This would be the natural and the spiritual.
Familiar illustrations of the natural.
So it says, by familiar illustrations, so this is the familiar illustrations. And so now it's talking about the nature of his kingdom and the manner in which it was established. The nature and the manner. And for those of us who were in prayer meeting, what did we say that the nature and the manner was? If we remember the two words that we chose. So I'm going to say, when it says the nature of his kingdom, I'm going to say the type, what it looks like. The type of kingdom. What kind of a kingdom is it? What does it look like? And then it says the manner in which it was to be established. And so we said the word how. How is it established, and what type of a kingdom is it? So in Christ Object Lessons, it's about the Jewish economy and the truth of redemption. So that same model is going to be brought to here in Desire of Ages, but this is not the Jewish economy. So this is not the story when it says by familiar illustrations. This is not a Jewish economy. The Jewish economy is about the feast days, etc. So what are the familiar illustrations? Parables. Let me give you some examples. A sower, mustard seed, yeast, fishing. We already spoke about the hidden treasure. A merchantman, the net with the fishing. That was the one I meant. A landowner who has servants and tells them what to do and what not to do. So I'm saying these are not Jewish economy symbols. Jewish economy symbols, I understand it to mean the festivals, the feast days, that type of thing. The ceremonial law. These are just normal day-to-day things that everybody does, whether you're a Jew or a Philistine or a Moabite, it doesn't matter. All of them do the same thing. Everyone knows that when you plant a seed, what you have to do, you have to water it. You don't have to be a Jew to understand that. And everyone looks for the first signs of the shoot germination, the shoot coming up, and how to take care of a plant. You need to dung it and look after it. So the familiar illustrations is just the normal day-to-day way of living. So the normal way of living is going to teach us what? It's going to teach us, as she says, the nature of his kingdom, or what type of a kingdom this is, and also the manner in which it is established, how it is set up. So,
You set up to worship. It wasn't worship.
yes. So, if I were to ask you, how does the kingdom of God grow? How did it get from 12 people to 120 people to 3,000 people?
Teaching. They had to be taught. They had to, well,
Through teaching, they had to be taught, yes. Any other thoughts?
I run out of,
I think that's what it is. They have to be, the way the kingdom grows is that people who have a misconception of how things work have to be taught, they have to be re-educated. So Jesus is re-educating his disciples here for 3 years. So there's this re-education process of 3 years from 28 to 31, and this re-education time period, the disciples understand, but their training hasn't finished. They need to continue their education, and once it's fully completed, then they're going to explain to the Jews, and they're going to re-educate them. So it really is about teaching and re-education. You're right. That's the first sentence of that paragraph. Then she's going to explain about the parables. And as I said, we did this in our prayer meeting for those of us who were not here. He likened his own work to that of the sower, the development of his kingdom to the growth of the mustard seed and the effect of leaven in the measure of meal. The great final separation of the righteous and the wicked he had pictured in the parable of the wheat and tares and the fishing net. The exceeding preciousness of the truth he had taught had been illustrated by the hidden treasure and the pearl of great price, while in the parable of the householder, he taught his disciples how they were to labour as his representatives. So as you just read that paragraph, it's a nice paragraph, but it's easy just to skip over that, which is why I like this passage that we read from Christ Object Lessons 104. So I want to say, in this paragraph, there's a lot of hidden treasure, and what we can do is just read that paragraph or just sit at that stump, and right underneath us is all these gems, all these truths, that if we just stopped a while and had a look under what's beneath our feet, we could see many, many things. And we only began to scratch the surface in our prayer meeting. So that's why I went to Christ Object Lessons first, is to show us, because we commented on this in the prayer meeting, that who would have thought just in this simple paragraph there were so many things that we could see, so many little gems or hidden truths that are right in there. Obviously we don't have time to go through that study again, but I don't know who to ask, the people who are there or the people who are not there. So what she's going to do in this paragraph is she's going to talk about Jesus' parables, and she's going to break them down into certain segments. So for those of us who weren't here, I don't know if you picked up, I didn't read it quickly, but I just read it without pausing, so it's not that easy to see. And I know it's not easy to see because in prayer meeting, when I asked the question how many segments, we had to really think about it and go back and double check, and we counted through, and we got 5 sections. I don't know if you can see that if you're looking at it for the first time. there are 5 sections that she breaks Jesus' teaching down into. We'll just quickly go through them. He likened his own work to that of the sower. 1. The development of his kingdom to the growth of the mustard seed in the effect of leaven in the measure of meal. 2. The great final separation of the righteous and the wicked he had pictured in the parables of the wheat and tares and the fishing net. 3. The exceeding preciousness of the truths he taught had been illustrated by the hidden treasure and the pearl of great price. 4. While in the parable of the householder he taught his disciples how they were to labour for his representatives. 5. So hopefully we can see that she's going to break down Christ's teaching of Matthew 13, the Sermon by the Sea, into 5 sections or 5 segments. Just want to remind us, if you're not, and we didn't do this at prayer meeting, that the last one, while in the parable of the householder he taught his disciples how they were to labour as his representatives, he doesn't do that in Matthew 13. He doesn't do that at that time. It's actually 7 chapters later in Matthew 20. But she throws that in, which I found interesting. All the first 4, all are found in Matthew 13. The last one, the parable of the householder, is not found in Matthew 13. We didn't discuss that previously. So we've got 5 sections. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what we did was we gave a title for each one of those 5 sections. So perhaps we could just do that quickly. Section 1. I'll read what she says so you get how to do it. He had likened his own work to that of the sower. So what is the theme of the first section?
Sowing.
Jesus' work.
Jesus' work?
Sowing, ploughing and sowing.
That's the parable. But she said, he had likened what? His work to that of the sower. So the sower is the parable, but his work is the theme, or the spiritual, if we could say that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah? So I just put a cross as a symbol of Christ. This is Christ's work. That's what that theme is. Then the second one, the development of his kingdom to the growth of the mustard seed and the effect of leaven in the measure of meal. So the second one is what?
The growth of the kingdom.
So it's the growth of the kingdom. So I'm going to do it backwards. I'm going to say the main theme is kingdom, and it's the growth. And we'll do the same here. The main theme is the work, but it's the work of Christ. We're okay with that? Third one. The great final separation of the righteous and the wicked he had pictured in the parables of the wheat and tares and the fishing net. So this one is separation, and this is the final separation. The fourth one, the exceeding preciousness of the truths he taught had been illustrated by the hidden treasure. So the next one is truth. And the last one, while in the parable of the householder, he taught his disciples how they were to labour as his representatives. So the last one is work. And it's not Christ. Yes. So this is human beings. So this is all, if we can see it, this is all the spiritual. Like we have here the spiritual. So here, what should we expect? The natural. We should expect to see the natural. And the natural is given in all these examples. It says, he had likened, the word liken is code word for parable, his work to that of the sower. So the parable here would be the parable of the sower. One parable. If you go to the next section, it says the development of his kingdom, we've got it here, the kingdom and its growth or development, was like to the growth of the mustard seed and the effect of leaven in the measure of meal. So we've got the mustard seed and yeast or leaven. So we've got two parables here. So we've got 1 and 2. So the next one, the third one, the great final separation of the righteous and the wicked, he had pictured in the parables of the wheat and tares and the fishing net. So you've got wheat and tares and the net. So there's 2 here. Fourth one, the exceeding preciousness of the truth he taught had been illustrated by the hidden treasure and the pearl of great price. So we've got hidden treasure and the pearl. And there's 2 parables here. So then if we can see a bit of a pattern here, without looking, how many parables would we expect to see here? We've got 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. So we'd expect to see 1, and if you read the paragraph, you'll see that it is 1. It says, while in the parable of the householder, he taught his disciples how they were to labour as his representatives. So this is the parable of the householder. So as soon as you see this structure, now you can do some interesting things with this. The first thing we can see is that there's this pattern here. What would we call this? This kind of structure. We call this a chiasm. A chiasm is a mirror. So often, instead of using it as a mirror, I would see it as a balance. So this is, if I label this as A, B, C, D, E, this would be C, this would be A, B and A, D and E. So you get this balancing effects, and it's all the fulcrum point and the hitch point is this middle one here, the separation of the wheat and tares. Once you can begin to see this structure, there's many things that you can do with this. So I don't want to go into this study, it's something that's already in the public domain, but if you were to go to Matthew chapter 5, it's a story of Belshazzar's feast. We all know the story. And as he's reveling in that feast, what does everybody see? They see a man's hand writing upon the wall. So the story of a hand comes into that story. And if you went to Daniel chapter 2, you see that there's a symbol of a mountain and a statue. And out of that mountain comes a stone. And that stone is carved out of a mountain. It says cut out. And I want to suggest, instead of the symbol of cut out, that we use a symbol of quarried. You have a stone quarried out of a mountain. And it says in that chapter that it's without hands. So in chapter 5 you see a person's hand, and in chapter 2 it says you see no hand. If you were to do the study on Daniel 2, what you would actually see is that there is a hand that quarries that stone out of the mountain. But what you'd have to do is you'd have to do a study to see when it says without hand, what that phrase without hand means. You can do a study of that in the Bible. And I don't know if anybody's done that before, but the phrase without hands, what does that mean? Exactly, it means without human devisings. So if I said no hand equals, I'll do it here, no hand equals human, no hand equals human. If we were to compare and contrast a human, what would we compare and contrast a human to with? With God. So a human and God, we could say they're opposites, a natural and a spiritual being. So if a human, when you said human, how did you say it? Human devising. So I'm going to put human devising. So if it's human devising, this would be what? God's devising. So if human devising means no hand, what does God's devising mean? It would mean hand. So I'm saying that in Daniel chapter 2, when it says no hand, it means it's not human devising, because God's going to be doing this work, which means that there is a hand that does that work. There is a hand that cuts out these stones from that mountain. I said stones, but in the chapter itself it just says stone in the singular. So this hand in Daniel 2 is the same hand in Daniel 5. I'm going to just say it simply like that. This is not a comprehensive study on the hand of God. The Bible talks about the right hand of God in a number of places. But the reason why that I think becomes significant, which we briefly discussed in the prayer meeting, is that when you have a hand, how many digits do you have? You have 5 digits. And how many points do we have here? We have 5. And so Sister Tess began to make a connection between these 5 points and the 5 digits on a hand. And the reason why that becomes significant is, if you've seen presentations that have been done, what is the hand of God symbolized as in recent studies that have been done? So if I were to do it this way, here's this hand of God. So I've done a picture of this hand. What would go on this side? What's being taught that the hand of God looks like? The waymarks, good. So it's being portrayed as a line of history, or line upon line, or a reform line. So the hand of God is being identified as a reform line. And as Brother John said, it's a reform line with 5 waymarks. So there's 5 digits would be 5 waymarks. And the reason that becomes significant is, when we spoke about all these parables before, Brother Brendan was mentioning, oh look, there's a lot of agricultural modelling in all of this. In fact, I think if you went through all of these 5 examples, not every single parable, but most of them are all to do with agriculture. So you have agriculture, 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 and the household is telling the people, the workers, what to do and what are they working on. Not construction workers, they're farm hands. So you see agriculture run all the way through this. So all of this is to do with agriculture, these 5 points. There are some that are not. Obviously the yeast is not, and the net is not, and the pearl is not. So these 3 have got 2 different stories. So again, you see a lot of structure in this. It's agriculture and agriculture, and you see agriculture in all of these 3, but you also have another story that runs parallel with them. So all I wanted us to see is that when you talk about this hand, which has got 5 digits, you can see in Daniel 2, Daniel 5, it's another symbol for a reform line with 5 waymarks. And the reason why this becomes important is because this 5 waymarks then has a symbology or a theme that's attached to it. And what's that theme? Agriculture. Just like all of this is. So that's why we can make the connection. All of this, these 5 points are about agriculture. The symbol of the hand is about agriculture. So you have all of this about agriculture. And if you were to look at that, this line with 5 waymarks, you have 4 time periods. And those 4 time periods line up with the agricultural cycle. I know we've all seen this before. The ploughing, the former rain, latter rain, and harvest. And we've run out of time, so we're going to finish now. But what I'm saying is, the suggestion that was made at prayer meeting is that you can take these 5 themes and you can line them up with these 5 waymarks. So here, this would be what? We'll go with the spiritual. So it'd be so this would be the work of Christ. This would be how the kingdom grows.
Truth. And then humans work.
And you can line all of this up into a reform line, and we'll just take the line of the priests. So if you take the line of the priests, what waymark is this one?
Panium.
So this is Panium right here. And what happens at Panium after they've gone through all of this training? What do the disciples end up doing? They end up going to work. So this is when they go to work. Now you can run this story different ways when you take a reform line. There are different truths. Because we can also argue that they begin to do a work here at Raphia after 30 years of training. But we know that we actually begin to do a work, according to the reform line of Christ here, at Pentecost, when the 3,000 people are brought into the church. It goes from the priests to the Levites. I think Brother Brenton mentioned that before. The 3,000 become a symbol of the Levite. So you can see that all of this statement that's just embedded here in Desire of Ages, page 333, can begin to line up with this story here. This is the work that we have to do, and you can see that if this is the Omega, this would be the Alpha, that Christ here begins to do a work for his people. And I guess what I'm going to say, I'm going to leave it for you to develop this study for yourselves if you have the inclination to do it, to see how these other 3 issues can be brought into these 3 waymarks and how it all really fits in quite neatly. This is Raphia, and Raphia is all about the truth. And what kind of truth are we dealing with? Are we dealing with this truth or this truth? It's this one. As Ellen White said it, it's not the truth, but it's the truth as it is in Jesus. So when we start talking about this truth here, it's not just truth in an intellectual way, but it's actually truth, as she would say, as it is in Jesus, or this is the truth of discernment. It's the truth where we begin to actually fully get to grips with, we'll say, the Jewish economy. Up to this history here, were the disciples having a problem with the Jewish economy? They were. Jesus says, I'm about to die, and every Jew in good and regular standing knows what? That the Messiah does not die. He's a king. They know he's not going to die. Whatever he means, he's either confused or there's some kind of misunderstanding. It's here that they really begin to understand the truth as it is in Jesus. So you can see that at Panium, there's the work that begins. Here we need to really get to grips and to understand the truth as it is in Jesus. We begin to have a clear discernment of what truth really is about. Which is interesting because at the moment, we're talking about certain truths. What truths are we talking about? We're fixated about them at the moment. 2 streams of information, and they're dealing with what subjects? Gender, racism, and conspiracy theories. It's all truth. And I'm saying we're just getting to grips with it at an intellectual level. We'll go through the mechanics. We'll make will treat men and women equally, but it really is a mechanical process for many of us. It's not to give that disservice. You're in a conversation and you're about to say something and you bite your lip. Yeah, you say, oh, you shouldn't say it. You know, it's inappropriate now that we know better. You may have done that, or you may have heard people do that. We kind of have a giggle about it. We kind of joke about it. So, you know, we're supposed to talk properly now. We're in an enlightened age since last year. We all understand the truth for our times. We know what we're being tested on. And you know, I've argued very recently, and people have, I'm going to say people have misunderstood what I've said. If you go to Revelation 13, don't turn there. The mark of the beast, you know, is whatever that means. It's not, however you understand it. Where do you get the mark of the beast? Where's it? In your hand, in your forehead. You get it on your right hand, because the right hand is the hand of power. I think this is correct, what I'm going to say, what I'm going to ask you. What does it mean in your forehead? Your forehead is, you know, where you're able to think. What does that mean in your forehead?
You made a choice.
You made a choice, or?
You believe it.
You believe it. That's how we normally understand it. You know, you have an intellectual assent to it. You say, I really believe this thing. What does it mean this is in your hand? Sorry? Force. So you're going to keep, the way people normally understand it, is you're going to keep Sunday, not because you believe in it, but because you've been forced to. That's the right hand. You're going to give power. You're going to go through the motions even if you don't believe it. So when you talk about the mark of the beast, what's the opposite of that? Seal of God. So you've got the seal, and you've got the mark. Where's the mark? In the hand and in the forehead. If you're okay with that? So if the mark is there, where would the seal be?
Forehead of hand.
It'd have to be the same. Looks like a crown, sorry. I'm saying it has to be in the same place. What does that mean if it's in the hand? It's forced upon you. You don't really believe it, but you're going to go through the motions. If you can make that connection, I'm saying you can do this through parable teaching. You compare and contrast two different issues, which have the same characteristics, you know, good and bad. That means you're going to be forced into a certain behavior. And people have argued, well, if you're forced or you're just going through the motions of doing something, that's not the true nature of salvation. So it's wrong to just do something, we'll say to treat women equally. Don't really believe it. Don't really think that we should, but I'm just going to do it because that's what's expected.
Just like between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law.
Exactly. The letter of the law, I'm just going to, if that's what the law is, I'm saying I'm going to comply. I don't like it, but I'll just do it. And people say, well, if that's the way you're going to operate, it's not genuine, and therefore you're going to fail the test. You're failing. And I'm arguing that you're not going to fail the test. If you want to get a mark of the beast, if you want the mark, how do you get it? You don't have to believe in it. You just have to do it. We know that. So I'm saying the opposite of that, it must operate in the same way. And the problem is, as Adventists, we have not been willing to do that, because our argument would be, when it comes to the seal of God, it only works this way. Only in your forehead. You can't do this, which means going through the motions and come out happy at the end of it. And I'm saying you can. So an example that's come up in presentations is what subject? It's women wearing trousers. And I've had discussions, and I've publicly stated, because sisters will say, I don't believe in it. And are you telling me if I just wear the trousers, it's all going to be okay? And I've said, yes. And here's my proof for it. Just wear the trousers, don't agree with it, and it's all okay. You've passed the test. And people find that really an untenable situation. What dispensation are we in? We're in the dispensation before this waymark here, before Raphia. So in this dispensation, I'm saying it's okay to do that. But here, if we're going to mark the truth here in Raphia, what's happening here in this time period about the truth? What kind of truth is this? The truth as it is in Jesus, which is the discernment, which is the truth coming into the heart. There's many, many passages where she connects the truth as it is in Jesus and what it actually means. The Bible itself will tell you, when the Bible says, having eyes they do not see, having ears they do not hear, what's the third one that they connect? The Bible connects with that. Do we know? It's an eye, an ear, and the third one is a heart. Straight out of Isaiah chapter 6. Having eyes they do not see, having ears they do not hear, having hearts, I think it actually says they do not discern or they do not understand, or it says that they have hearts that are waxen gross, which means they've got fatty deposits on them. So all of these are similar concepts. So if you have a shut eye, an ear that doesn't hear, you have a heart that is closed to the truth. And where's the law meant to be? It's meant to be put in your heart. So you can see that this issue of discernment is really about the subject of having the truth coming to your heart. So in this period here, all the truths that we're dealing with now on an intellectual basis will actually have to be dealt with at a heart level. And that's what we're expecting to see in this period before we can begin to do a work. You can get all of these little gems and many, many more just by taking a passage, breaking it down and observing things that a straight reading you wouldn't see. So, you could sit down at a tree stump, open Desire of Ages up, and just read it. You'd have a nice devotional experience, and the deep truths that are there are just below the surface hidden, and you'll never see them unless you're actually intent on looking. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness. We want to ask and pray that you would be with us and bless us. As we meditate and study upon your word, we ask, Lord, that you would guide and direct us. We know that your word is an endless stream of truth, and we didn't even finish a surface review of these waymarks, of this structure, let alone having a deep experience, a deep thought process on each one of these things and what they mean to us. Help us, Lord, to be encouraged in this one small example as you show us that there are many things still to be learned and uncovered. We know, Lord, that if you can guide your people when we come together to open your word, that you can guide and direct us in these truths, because we've experienced it even this week. We know that as time rolls on, not only in mortality but in immortality, that you will continue to guide and direct us. This is our hope and our expectation in Jesus' name. Amen.